access point standards with direct instruction. So does the student need that very small modified curriculum? Do they have to have that with a one-on-one or small group setting, very direct, specialized instruction in order to be successful and to access those standards that are in place?
Well, I know for parents, this can be just from sitting into meetings with parents, that it can be a little confusing for them. So as a district, when parents are coming to these IEP meetings and we're discussing whether their child meets that criteria, is who makes that determination? Is it done as a group? What kinds of thoughts can the parents go in with to be able to really help them understand the process as to what does most significant cognitively impaired means? Does that mean that, for example, they have a child that they know is cognitively impaired, but how do we make that determination whether they are most significantly cognitively impaired? Because I know that's been a question that has come up for parents of trying to understand, are there different levels of being cognitively impaired?
Yes, there are different levels based on the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, 5th edition,
Whoa.
which is not a very parent-friendly book, but within that, it provides us a variety of different levels for what a cognitive disability entails. So whenever we do look at the most significant cognitive disability or what that most significant means, we take into account of a lot of different things. We take into account IQ testing, we take into account aptitude testing, we also look at adaptive behaviors, we look at daily living, we look at a variety of different things whenever we come to meet about a student to see if they truly meet that criteria that the state has set forth for what is a significant cognitive disability.
When you're having that conversation with the teachers and helping them to bridge that understanding between those students who are behind grade level versus those students who are most significantly cognitively delayed, what information do you work with the team to look through? What data, specific data, is helpful so teachers understand those distinctions?
One set of data that we look at is their RTI data, or their response to intervention data. We also call it MTSS data. It's not momentary time sampling. Those of you who are in the field of data, y'all would know that MTSS is momentary time sampling, but that is not what we call it here. We call it multi-tiered systems of support. And with that MTSS data, or the multi-tier systems of support, we look at how the student responds to the intervention. So we look at the team and we see if there are certain interventions in place. How is the student doing with those interventions? Are they making progress? Are they not making progress? Are they declining? And do we need to look at some ulterior things to put in place to help them be successful in the classroom? In addition, some of the things that we talk to with teachers is what kind of accommodations do we have in place for those students? And with those accommodations, are there other things that we can do to help them access their curriculum so that they can understand it? We really want to focus on how can we equal the playing field for some of our students with disabilities who may have that cognitive deficit with some of their same age peers.
So with accommodations, what kinds of accommodations would we be looking at? I know that we've had this discussion within our department of working with our schools, because for years it seemed like we would choose, the top 5, but really there's a lot more accommodations, and I think that's something that's important for our parents and our teachers to know, because now the state's requiring us to dig deeper when it comes to those accommodations, and we're not just talking preferential seating and extended time. There's a lot of other ones that could be used, and in making that determination, it's important that we are looking at the accommodations and can they be successful with those. But we're talking about really a new wave of thinking of what is an accommodation.
Absolutely. So within the state of Florida, they produce what we call an accommodations handbook or an accommodations manual. And within the accommodations manual, what it does is it breaks down what the effect of the disability is for students. So what area does a student have trouble with? And based off of what area a student may have trouble with, it provides us a way or a guide or a path to put in place certain accommodations. So for instance, if a student is having trouble with reading or decoding words, then there are allowable accommodations such as read allowable items that we are allowed to put in place in the classroom to help a student access the curriculum in the classroom and understand what's going on in that classroom on a daily basis. Does that kind of help you understand a little bit about those accommodations that are in place? Would you like for me to expound upon accommodations?
Yes, actually, I think
Okay.
that, you know, it is so important when we go into these meetings that we're helping everybody to understand what, whether we agree or not, what the state focus is. And I think it's important for them to understand that what they're looking at now is that we just haven't covered the surface, that we're actually digging really deep and seeing what other accommodations we can give to the child to help make them successful in a gen ed setting.
Right.
Okay.
So within the realm of accommodations, we have a whole list of accommodations that can be provided. So as Ms. Anderson has stated before, we typically see things such as preferential seating or seating where the student does best, small group instruction, or small group testing, and we see some things such as extended time. Those are the accommodations that we typically can provide. But if we really look at how the student is doing in the classroom and what effect the disability has on the student in the classroom, then we can provide a whole list of and variety of other accommodations to help the student access the curriculum and access that daily instruction. So some of those accommodations may include the use of a calculator. They could include reading aloud. They could include assistive technologies such as utilizing computer or device. We could also look at possibilities of using text to speech or speech to text. We also can bring in certain programs such as Kurzweil, which we've just rolled out in our district, that helps read items to the student so that they are utilizing a device or computer for those read allowable opportunities and they can help understand some of that content. We can also look at ways that we can have students preview material prior to it being introduced in the class so that they can have some background knowledge on the subject matter. In addition, we can also look at things such as having guided notes for the kids and having key ideas, details provided to the students prior to instruction so that the students are able to make those connections between instruction and what is going on throughout their whole entire time in that classroom.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
We're familiar with all of those accommodations. So can you describe for parents or whomever may be watching what we're doing as a district team to ensure that the schools have access to the types of maybe unique accommodations that are available for students?
So currently within the district and the schools, we are creating trainings and we are working with the teachers to help them understand what those accommodations are. We're also working with administrators so that administrators understand what those accommodations are. And we're going out to schools, working with teachers and working with paraprofessionals who may be in the class and other people at the school to help them really understand what the differences in accommodations are, how those accommodations can play into the student's performance in that classroom, and how the student can truly be successful in the classroom based off of the use of those accommodations.
So if we're looking at a student and we have the IEP team together and we're trying to make those decisions as to whether that child needs to be on the alternate assessment or take the regular assessment, when we're looking at that, we can't make that determination that they need the alternate assessment unless the schools have tried a wide variety of those accommodations. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So going back to those 3 questions that I had talked about previously, in order for a student to be eligible for the alternate assessment, we have to answer yes for every single one of those questions. And in answering yes to each one of those questions, one of the components is that the school and the teachers have provided accommodations based off of that student's effect of their disability, to ensure that they've had that access to the general education curriculum. So there's a multitude of things that we can do. There's a variety of things that we can do within that second question, within those accommodations, to really ensure that we've hit a whole bunch of things to really gauge whether or not the student is successful.
Very good. One of the other issues that come up when we start looking at cognitive impairment and alternate assessment is, I think sometimes that when we get into those meetings, parents feel like it's that drives the setting or the classroom in which the student is located. And typically through our IEPs, our goal is to create what supports and needs that the student has and what services we need to provide them. And then the setting is a whole nother situation. So can we make those determinations that if a child is on FSA, the alternate FSA-A, does that mean that they have to stay in a classroom all day, like a self-contained, or can they go into the gen ed setting?
So every IEP meeting that we have, every plan that we put in place, we really individualize it per the student and what their needs are. So we have several students in our district who needs are better served in an inclusive environment or in inclusion with access to those access point standards. But we also have students who may need that reading and the math within a self-contained setting, so that they can have that really direct specialized instruction, but then they go out for science and social studies. And then we also have students who really their needs are truly met in that self-contained setting during that full time. So it really depends on where the needs are of each of those kids, and we take that into effect whenever we meet at an IEP meeting to really make the best determination for that student to ensure they have access to same age typical peers.
Okay, good. Well, to go on to another part of those 3 questions, you had talked about different scales that are used, like the adaptive behaviors. I don't know that all of our parents would know what an adaptive behavior scale would be. What does that mean when we look at their adaptive? I think most of our parents would know just through layman's term about the daily living skills and the things like that we discussed. But what would be included in adaptive behaviors?
So for the adaptive behavior skills, what we typically do is a school psychologist will either meet with a parent and do an interview, or they'll send home a rating checklist for a parent to fill out that helps guide us to where a student is in regards to communication and daily living skills, as well as there could be some other areas indicated on that adaptive behavior. And based off of the rating from the parents whenever they send those forms back, or based off of the interview and how they answer the questions in the interview, the school psychologist will take that information and tabulate it with their special little skills that they have, and then they produce to us some evaluations and some scores and measures based off of those areas that give us an indication of where the student is in relationship to same age peers.
Would there be a reason why we would have 2 adaptive scales that we're looking, as far as both a teacher adaptive rating scale and a parent? What would be the purpose of having both of those measures?
Well, what we typically find with the adaptive rating scales is that the teachers and the parents are not always in agreement, or not always congruent with one another. So we actually look at both of those. Sometimes we look at a couple of teachers or a couple of parents adaptive behaviors, because we really want to figure out what that whole child is, what the picture of the whole child is. And the more data that we have, or the more documents, I know I use that big word data, the more documents that we have, such as those adaptive behaviors, that give us an indication of who that child is, that whole child, will help the team make that determination of what's the best educational placement and decisions for that child.
I think sometimes parents get scared a little
Absolutely.
bit
Yeah.
when, say, they have a child that's been on the alternate assessment, and maybe they're in elementary and have spent a good portion of that primary age in a self-contained, because they're teaching those skills, their academics, but they're also working. Maybe their child has some social skills. Maybe they have some emotional skills that they need to learn. I know that when we start talking and we're looking at each of the students that are on the alternate assessment, and we're starting to really make those decisions about them coming off and going on to the FSA, the regular assessment, that can be very, very scary for our parents. I think that they worry about that all one deal again, and how will their child make progress when they feel like they may be significantly behind. Say they're significantly behind in one area, but they're not behind in all areas and really don't meet that criteria. What is some good advice that we can give to our parents, or what strategies maybe would be better that we as a district would take to help bridge that for that child, of going from strictly a self-contained classroom to now we're looking at saying to have them in the gen ed setting for one of their strongest areas or one area? How can we help that transition for our parents and making sure that they know that we're looking out for their best interests of their child, but also they're worried about the emotional aspect? Are there things that we can do or conversations that we could have that could help them?
Yeah, as long as we like to just really stay positive and really look at what areas does a student excel in and how do they learn. And if we look at that student and we look at that child and we pinpoint their areas that they excel in and how they learn, we can put a variety of strategies in place to help them. So if talking to them about certain things help them, then we can break stuff down into some of the lots of details that are provided in those gen ed classrooms. We can break that down, or what we call chunking, and we can talk to the kids about that information, and we can present it to them in a different manner. We can also put in place some different techniques and strategies for seeing how they're doing in those classrooms. So if we need to pull back a little bit in those classrooms, we can. If we see that the student's doing really well and we want to push them a little bit more, we can do that as well. Look at some of those things that we have in place for that. We can also provide social stories for some of our students who may not understand like what those expectations are in that other classroom. So really kind of give them a guide or a checklist for what to expect when they're in there. And then I think the biggest proponent for any success for any child moving from that self-contained classroom into an inclusive classroom is just to have that open communication with the parents and really bringing them in and helping them understand what those things are that we're putting in place in the classroom. And then if they can mirror any of those strategies or any of those things that are in place in the classroom at home, that will really help benefit the student in the long run.
So it sounds like a really good, strong communication between school and home is really important, so that the parent feels part of that process.
Absolutely.
And to maybe understand that just because that setting or that classroom placement is going to change for a portion of the day, doesn't mean that the other supports for maybe their social emotional needs are going to go away.
Correct.
Those would still be available to that child no matter what classroom setting
Yep.
that child is in.
Mhm.
All right. So, we've talked about, okay, now that we've got the FSA, which is our regular assessment, and FSAA, the alternate assessment, which for anybody in or out of the field can be very confusing when we're talking about those. So we go through the process of the IEP of looking at the 3 questions. And you've said that all 3 questions have to be answered to be able to make that determination. When we do that, does that lock that type of assessment in forever and ever, or do we look at that every year when we come back to the IEP team?
So any decisions that are made in an IEP are re-evaluated or re-looked at every single year. They can also be looked at should a parent request an IEP meeting to come back and look at it before the end of the year. But typically we look at those on a yearly basis based off of any kind of data or documentation or monitoring that we have regarding the student within that yearly time frame.
Because you're looking at that on an annual basis, what new data comes into the equation? Like, we know that students are evaluated on the alternate assessment, but what happens within that year so that teachers can look at the new information to make that determination for the next year?
So one of the third question that we talk about is relative to English language arts, mathematics, science and social studies, and a student within that question being educated on that modified curriculum. One thing that we have found with some of our students is that with the use of some things that we put in place, like iReady, some of their deficit areas or some of their challenges that they're having are actually bridging the gap a little bit, and we're seeing less of an academic gap between their grade level and their ability level. So some of those things are coming up, and we're seeing a lot of progress with that, which indicates to us that they are able to do some of that grade level work or those Florida standards that we talked about earlier with accommodations.
So would that answer the question that for parents, when their child is moving out of a self-contained class for no matter what time period, but a subject area, and they know that their child has struggled academically, and they know that their child is behind academically, and so in their minds they're scared that they're going into, say, a 5th grade class but their child's only reading on a 1st or 2nd grade level. So sometimes I think that's hard for them to really grasp how that's going to look and feel, because does that mean that their child is going to have to take the same exact tests for the same exact stuff that the typical child? So, I understand that part of it for them, because, they're struggling, they're 3 grade levels behind, but we're saying as a state that we would like them included. And I know what the state talks about is that we give them that opportunity to be exposed to the curriculum, to the grade level curriculum. How can we help the parents understand how that instruction is going to look for their child? Are they held accountable if they're 3 grade levels behind? Are they going to get the same exact grade and the same exact test as everybody else? What does that look like and feel like for them?
Some of those things actually do look the same for some of those kids on paper. But whenever you go deeper than what the paper says, it looks a lot different. So in terms of what they would be providing or how they would be, they may be able to talk about some of those things. Yes, they may be having challenges with reading, and they may be a couple of grade levels below that 5th grade work. But what we typically have found is that when our kids go into those 5th grade classrooms and they talk with their peers about that content or that what's being taught, if they talk to their teachers, or their ESE teachers, or even a paraprofessional if they're in there, then they're able to give the same information that their other peers are, although it may look different. So it looks different, but it's typically that same information. They're understanding what's being taught in those classes, and they're grasping the content and what those expectations are in those classrooms. Then the other expectation that you were talking about is the testing. That yes, at the same time, if they are not deemed eligible for the Florida Standards or alternate assessment, then they are required to take the FSA that we had talked about. There are some accommodations that we can put in place for them, but there are some accommodations that we can utilize in the classroom that we can't utilize on the test. All right, so there's two different things that we can provide for them too. But ultimately, it doesn't hold them back from anything. And I think that's the major thing is we really want to see how a student's learning in the classroom. We want to see how we can help that student learn in the classroom and see what their areas of needs are, because ultimately our focus is that classroom, that child, and helping them be successful in the classroom.
And I think too, when they are taking the FSA assessment and making that bridge, when you look at growth, you're going to look at the growth levels within each area. We score on a scale of 1 through 5, but within each one of those areas, you have a lower level one, you have a mid-level one, and then you have a higher level one. So when you're looking at growth, it's not necessarily just your student has been a level 1. Where are they in relation to where they've been in the past? And I think that especially with English language arts, we have more teachers that are starting to look at those breakdowns every year, because as a 7th grader looking at it saying, oh my gosh, I'm a level 1 more time. But if you break it down and say, okay, you're level 1 this year, you're in the middle, but if you gain 7 points every time you take this for the next 3 years, as a 10th grader, you've got exactly what you need. And you've met that level of proficiency.
Very good. You know, parents, now is the time. We have approximately 4 minutes left. I just got the minute-by-minute update. So if you have any questions for either one of our guests, please go ahead and send those in now. And while we're waiting on any questions, we do have a couple of housekeeping items that we would like to make you aware of. One of it should be the Florida State University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities will be providing, in conjunction with the Escambia County Fire and Rescue, a Be Prepared. It is a basic first aid for individuals with autism. It's available for students 16 years and up. You do have to RSVP for that event, and it will be coming up on Monday, February the 12th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And there is an address of 5154 Bayou Avenue in Pensacola. So that sounds like that would be some great information for our students if they would like to attend that and have some basic first aid. I know some adults that could use that also. I may need to go and attend for everything that happens around here. And then we also put on the screen for you an updated blended cafe schedule and a vision from your local friendly ESE department, which would be us, and just kind of a vision for our attempt with the blended cafe is to be able to get our message out to everybody, give parents the opportunity for input. We know how difficult it is with having students, some of that may have significant needs, and it's not as easy for you to get out to come to workshops and parent education, so we're trying to bring it to you. And our goal with that is to really be able to get parent input to increase that collaboration and to make sure that we are doing the best we can to have an inclusive setting ourselves by including you, the parents, in on what's happening with your child and what goes on within their school day. So if you ever have any questions, whether it's related to this topic or not, we have several different ways. You can email us, you can call us, you can respond through the web. We also have a link on our ESE homepage under parents that is a form that you can fill out, that if you have concerns or questions, you fill it out, it will send it to us, and we will get back in touch with you and find out what the situation is and how we can help you either answer questions or sometimes solve issues. Our goal is to also be that facilitator that can help you link you and the school together to make that connection even stronger. So there's some great opportunities for you to join us and to allow us the privilege of helping your child succeed in school. All right, so last moment. We have 1 minute. It's your last opportunity. Also, it's your last opportunities, guest speakers, to give any last minute suggestions or input that you may have for our parents.
I think the biggest thing when it comes to testing, whether it's FSA, ESE, or FSAA, is to make sure that your child gets a good night's sleep the night before and that they are eating breakfast, whether it's at school or before they leave the house, the morning of testing. We are in the middle of flu season. Please, if your child's not feeling well, there are makeup times available. A sick child testing is never going to perform as well as they possibly could. So if they're not feeling well or running a fever, let them stay home. We have makeup days built into our schedule so that we can get everybody tested in a timely manner.
What?
Yes, ma'am.
They can miss that day if they're really sick and have it made up?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we really would prefer that they miss the day if they're really sick because they're sitting in a classroom or an area with a large number of students, which means that whether it's a stomach virus or the flu or strep or bronchitis, we're sharing that with everyone in the room. So if they are not feeling well, it is okay to be at home.
And that brings up, in closing, just some food for thought. I know coming from the principal, being a former principal, one of the things we used to talk to our parents about is I know that it used to be really, really stressed and how important that the testing is. It is important. However, I think that there's a balance there in helping our families and having our families help our students to not turn that into some really high anxiety because of that. And because if you do that, then they're not going to perform as well either. And one of the things I used to tell my parents was, your kiddos look to you to see how to respond to things. And if you're telling them to take it serious and do your best, that's good. That's setting that expectation for them. But if you're really nervous and anxious and really, really over the edge concerned about your child taking that test, sometimes they can pick up on that. So, it's good when they look to you as a parent for them to see how to react to it. Like, I need to take this very serious, but it's not something that I should be making myself sick over. All right. Well, thank you, and we appreciate you, and we will see you next month in March.